out there in the electronic ether. This is Reverend Z, and I'm coming to you with the fourth, and for the moment, the final part on this series of If Mr. Trump is a Latter-day Cyrus II. Like I've said in the past, Trump has a group of followers that just love him to death, and they want to see the best in him. And I get that. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I really like Teddy Roosevelt. He was an interesting dude. He did some great stuff. He did some really shady, terrible things too. But that brings us back to, is Mr. Trump a Latter-day Cyrus II? Now, Cyrus, like Teddy Roosevelt, and perhaps someday like Mr. Trump, is a complicated person that there is a lot of stuff about. In fact, there are very few people in the Bible, or specifically in the Old Testament, where there is so much in the Bible about them and in the historic record that we could be spending this much time and have such a good idea of what the character and perhaps even to some extent what the mindset of the person is. And so this is really kind of interesting that Cyrus II was chosen because, frankly, of all of the people in the Old Testament, he's one of the easiest to debunk in this situation. Anyway, this today is perhaps the most damning piece of evidence against this prophecy, I guess you would call it, and that is Matthew chapter 24, verses 24 through 28. As usual, I will be reading out of the NIV translation of the Bible. For false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you ahead of time. So if anyone tells you, there he is out there in the wilderness, or do not go out, or here he is in the inner rooms, do not believe it. For as lightning that comes from the east is visible in the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever there is a carcass, there the vultures will gather. So yes, there is a scripture that speaks directly to Mr. Trump. So we have Christ himself warning us against false messiah. It does not take a great theologian to see how this scripture debunks this situation. And frankly, it does not get more authoritative than Christ himself. Christ also tells us that when the Messiah does return, it's going to be like lightning. There's going to be no question about it. It's going to be so unmistakable that there simply will not be questions. It'll be super obvious. Well, frankly, I don't think it's that obvious, and it doesn't. I have questions, and so do a lot of other people. Mr. Trump's best defenders willingly admit that he is not what most people would consider a Christian. He is a leader of a powerful nation. These two things are all that Mr. Trump has in common with Cyrus the Great. We didn't even examine the character or record of these two men in great depth. Cyrus the Great was in a committed and loving relationship with one woman. There was so much love, they were so much in love with each other, their contemporaries thought there was something wrong with them. They couldn't understand why a powerful man would shackle himself and be faithful to one woman. There was even a great period of mourning that Cyrus instituted after her death. Cyrus was also notoriously honest. And this isn't just the scriptures, because obviously the Jews like Cyrus a lot. He did a lot for them, so perhaps you'd think maybe that's the Jewish people liking their guy a lot. No, there are lots of other sources that suggest that Cyrus was maybe even a little bit too honest. He only broke his word when circumstance was simply too powerful or a bunch of people were going to be killed. In fact, there was unrest in what we now call Israel. He put the reconstruction of the temple on hold during this time. As far as I can tell, this is the only time that he lied to the Jews. Their relationship with their wife, or wives in Mr. Trump's case, and their relationship with the truth could not be further apart from one another. Each of these could have been their own video, and there are many more little differences that could be picked apart. Still, I cannot get past the 24th verse of the 24th chapter of Matthew. For false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. As far as I can tell, Mr. Trump has not performed any great signs or wonders. I guess he won the election, and people wonder how that happened. But he certainly has deceived some of God's most faithful followers. So for right now, we're just going to leave it there. And frankly, if your signs and your word and if who you are is so powerful that there should be no question, you don't need to lie about stuff. And one of the things that we know most about Mr. Trump is that he lies a great deal. Well, we're going to leave that right there for the moment. Like I said, in reading this, I've seen at least 5 other subjects that are just fascinating on this, and we may just do a whole series on Cyrus himself because there's just such a wealth of information on him, and he really is a very interesting person. But there are a couple of house cleaning things that I would like to kind of throw out there, because we did receive several messages on the tweeters. I have one person, 20 or so messages back and forth, and they kept insisting that I don't pray at all, which I certainly think I pray enough, but that's beside the point. First, my use of Mr. Trump is an American tradition. It is a tradition that goes back to President Washington. Apparently, President Washington did not think that royal titles were appropriate for the President of the United States, which obviously that's become instituted in our tradition, and it has been that way since then. So if you want to blame someone for calling him Mr. Trump, blame Mr. Washington. Several have also claimed that I must not be a Christian if I disagree with other Christians. Frankly, the scriptures are what is not lining up. Also, if you get to the point in a conversation where someone is telling the other to shut up, it is clear who does not have the leg to stand on. So for all of those folks on the internet telling me to shut up, I think everyone that is tuned in for this series, like I said, there may be more. I'm also working on my first podcast. It will be this series with some additional content and a sermon. So good times if you are sermon fans out there. Please like or dislike this video and subscribe to YouTube. There is also Patreon if you would like to help out the channel. If you hated it, tell me why you hated it. And if you hated it because I disagree with you, ask yourself, do the scriptures agree with you or not? Once again, as always, people, please keep me in your prayers. I will be keeping you in mind. Thank you. And I hope God blesses you richly.